This is the GFX 102, and it's actually my first experience shooting with medium format, either on film or on digital. So I was able to borrow this camera from Fujifilm for a few weeks. I actually initially just asked them if I could use it for a trip I was gonna be on in Hawaii. So I actually just published the video. So if you haven't watched it yet, I'll put the link in the description. So initially I was just gonna use it as a travel one video kind of camera, but I was actually able to use it for a couple more weeks after that. So I was able to test it out in different environments. I took it as my daily camera when I went to Disneyland with my family. I also used it to go on a photo walk with a bunch of people for the first time here locally. And I used it for one video shoot for a new restaurant here in Pasadena. I was actually able to use it in a bunch of different types of ways. So I felt like I wanted to make a video that was kind of like explaining what I loved and didn't love so much about the medium format aspect of this camera. So this is not so much a review on the actual camera, but my experience on what it's been like using this camera for the last month or so. So starting with the design of this camera, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with medium format, but this is one of the best looking cameras, in my opinion, that I've actually shot with. It's beefy and it's like kind of overpowering, but I'm used to using smaller cameras. Like the Leica Q2 is my daily driver camera, the one I bring everywhere. So initially when I was looking into using this camera, I was a little bit apprehensive on the size of it. And while it is pretty big, it's a really comfortable camera. And if you kind of bring a lot of gear with you on a daily basis, you kind of don't really feel the weight after a while. Like I've been putting this camera in my camera bag daily for the last month or so, and I don't really feel it anymore. Like I use a Clever Supply Co. sling bag and it fits beautifully in there. And so I'm able to carry this around very, very comfortably. And one of the things I really like about the design is how this viewfinder is like, if you're not someone who usually likes to shoot with a viewfinder, you can actually remove it very easily. And even then, like, honestly, if you're actually watching this video, make a camera that is just basically this. I know that you had the 50R a couple of years ago that I haven't tried yet because they're so hard to find and kind of out of my price range right now. But if you can make like a rangefinder style camera, I think people would love it, including me. That would be my perfect camera if I was looking to invest into medium format. I think this style of body with the viewfinder kind of offset, it really, I think, would be like my ideal camera. So even with the viewfinder, it's not that bulky and it's super easy to put back on there. And so I think, honestly, I've shot with a bunch of different Fujifilm cameras. I've shot with I owned the X100F a couple years ago. I also shot with the X-T3 for a while. And while I really like those cameras and actually have an X100VI pre-order, I think this is gotta be one of my favorite designs by Fujifilm. I really like the materials they used. It feels really robust and like it's not gonna break or anything. I also love the fact that there's a movie and still dial if you wanna use this as a hybrid camera. So I like the little e-ink display here that you can actually use for different purposes. Look at all your settings. It's really useful to have. Like, has a bunch of buttons everywhere, like 2 buttons in the front, 3 in the front right here too, right next to one of these wheels. Like, everything feels so well put together and like the materials feel really high quality. There's a dial back here too, a bunch of different buttons. You can switch out from manual to continuous to single shot for your focusing modes. So I think overall, like, I really love the design of this camera, not just because like I am a big fan of like minimal design for dials and buttons, but I also, since I shoot with Sony, customizing cameras, if you have the options, it's a big priority for me. And knowing that you can program all these buttons to do different things really goes a long way. Like even like the placement of the Q button up here for all your quick menu settings, it's really well thought out. So I really like the design of this body, especially because this camera is primarily a stills camera. So like, I know some people would prefer like an articulating screen where you can see yourself if you're gonna shoot video with this. But honestly, if you're shooting shooting photos with cameras, this type of design for your screen is much better for me. Like, I really like the rigidness of the screen. It feels really high quality if you want to shoot vertical or horizontal. And continuing on with the design of this camera, I really like this screen. It's really bright, especially this screen to viewfinder combo. Like, I found myself using these half and half. With cameras, I tend to use like gravitate toward one or the other. Like my Q2, I tend to use the viewfinder a lot. For like Sony cameras, I usually use the screen. So for this one, I was able to like get pretty used to it pretty quickly using the viewfinder or using the screen. They're both really bright, so they're really nice to compose with. Like, this is one of the biggest viewfinders I've ever shot with, and for someone like me who wears glasses, that goes a long way. So I really love the design of this. I think the overall design language that Fujifilm has for this camera, I think they should bring them over to the rest of their lineup, because I just love this so much. One thing I've always heard about medium format cameras is the flexibility in the files and how beautiful the files are. And I always thought like, well, you know, I think it's really comparable. Like, it's something that I really wanted to see for myself, to see if people are just kind of hyping it up and it's not something that's actually tangible. It's something that I can see. So I'm like, most of the stuff that I shoot on is full frame. So I always thought full frame is more than enough. Oftentimes it's overkill. So with medium format, how good could these files be? So like, the first time I opened up one of these raw files from medium format, I was blown away. The detail that you get be able to capture. I mean, this camera has a 100 megapixel sensor, so obviously you're gonna get tons of detail, but whenever you shoot on medium format, and especially in this camera, you get so much detail and flexibility in your files. So like, if you tend to overexpose or underexpose, there's so much latitude to be able to do whatever you want with the files. Like, even my normal editing style, like I try using my my presets that I've been developing, I even had to tweak them even more, because there's even more information there that it doesn't take advantage of. So I had to like tweak what my colors would look like in my presets just to kind of work with these files, because there is just so much detail. So I was able to shoot with it during the day, at night, different lighting situations. I was never afraid that I was not gonna nail the exposure, because it is so flexible that I was able to pull information on either side, whether I was under or overexposing. And it's not just the detail in the photos, but also the depth of field you're able to get with certain lenses. So if you're using prime lenses on medium format, if you're using like a 1.7 or even a 2.8, you get so much separation if you're using it for like portraits. I was able to shoot with this camera on, I took it on a photo walk. I've never been on a photo walk before, so I really wanted to take this camera and kind of expand my reach and ask for a few people for their portraits, because I really wanted to try out this camera for that purpose, because I know medium format's really popular in that sense. So I was able to get a few portraits of different people I met during the day. So I was really impressed on all the detail I was able to get. Since I wasn't there very long, I was able to get quite a few shots that I was really happy with. So again, it's just going back to the detail of the file. So it renders color really beautifully, and I was able to edit them in a way that I'm really happy with. So it's something that I was not super prepared to kind of find, even though I hear it all the time. So like, it's not really all about the GFX, it's also like medium format. Like, I'm a huge fan of the way that medium format looks, and there's something to be said of whether or not that translates into like social media. So if you're using this camera for social media, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see the like full experience of what it's like to see these files, because they get compressed so much. But seeing them like big on a computer screen, like it really blew me away. So if you're wanting to get this camera to get a different look for like social media, maybe think twice if that's the main purpose you're going to be using this camera for. But if you're someone who is all about the experience and what things look like for yourself, I mean, it's such a beautiful experience. I was able to borrow 2 different lenses from Fujifilm, and there's not a lot I can say about these lenses, because I borrowed the 55 and the 45. I initially asked for the 45 mainly just because of the size and weight. It's so much lighter than the 50, and I didn't shoot a lot at night, so I didn't find that I needed like the extra stop of light. So I'm a really big fan of this lens. Like, it's big and bulky, you know, I'm used to full frame, but it's a really nice lens. Like, it doesn't really weigh all that much more if you add it to the body of the camera. And so like most of my experience with this camera was using this lens mostly as like a travel everyday camera, everyday lens combo. And so at the 2.8, it was plenty of light for me. I really liked the colors and all the different compositions I was able to get with this. 45 millimeters on medium format is really close to what I'm used to on full frame. So it was definitely a favorite of mine. The 55 I was able to use mostly for the portraits I took during the photo walk. So I'm a huge fan of that lens for that aspect. So for a professional lens, I think it really, it adds a lot to the kit. So if you're using it for portraits or using it for video or anything like that, I think having that extra stop of light really helps out with that. But I don't think it's like a necessity if you're just kind of looking to get into the system. The 45 is such a great lens. It's really sharp, and I think it's really versatile. I was able to shoot with this camera on one video shoot. I wouldn't necessarily buy this camera for the video specs. Like it has like some really beefy video specs, and again, I didn't really use it much for video, so I don't feel like I have like much experience to be able to be like, yes, get it for video, because I didn't feel like I utilized it enough. I was able to get a few shots for a grand opening for a new restaurant in Pasadena. So a couple of shots I was able to get. I used it like wide open. The 55, I was able to use the 55 wide open. So for that aspect, like it's really beautiful. Like I was really happy with the video I was able to get. Like I said, since I didn't really play around with video too much, I actually underexposed a lot of my shots. But again, if you're using any type of like RAW or F-Log, any type of thing like that, you're able to recover a lot. So that's the only time I was able to use this for video, but I was really happy with it. I wouldn't necessarily get this for video, but if you are looking for medium format camera that also can get really beautiful video if you need it, I think it's such a great package for having like a hybrid system. Okay, some of the things I did not like about this camera is basically it boils down to battery life. The Fujifilm only provided me with one battery. Obviously, if I was buying this camera, I would get a couple of batteries, but I wasn't able to get much out of these little batteries. Like I was shocked how small these batteries are. Like I don't know if you can see here, look how tiny these batteries are for, I would assume that a medium format camera would have gigantic batteries. Like for example, these are my Sony batteries. And if you compare it to the GFX batteries, like they're basically the same size. So I was shocked of how small these internal batteries are. Obviously, Fujifilm has accessories that you can use to kind of extend your battery life out of your camera. But if you're using this camera for like for weddings or events or anything like that, you really are gonna have to invest in that, especially if you because you're gonna need a bunch of these little batteries. So I was able to get anywhere between 400 shots on a good day, sometimes 500. So it really depends on how much you use this camera, how much you're using the viewfinder, the screen, if you're doing a lot of burst stuff or you're shooting video. So that's something I was pretty surprised about just because I didn't have any experience using this camera. So battery life is not great. So if you're looking to buy this camera, definitely invest in a few of these if you want to keep the camera light. But other than that, like I think for what it is and how powerful it is, maybe for the next iteration, Fujifilm can put an extra beefy battery in there. Another con is actually something I already touched on earlier, which is the file sizes. Like I love the detail and the resolution I get of the files, but if you're someone who doesn't have like a very beefy computer that can handle these files, it's really gonna struggle, because even though my MacBook Pro, my 14-inch MacBook Pro has pretty good specs, it does struggle a little bit trying to like process everything that I'm trying to do with these files. So if you're not someone who's kind of used to having that kind of workflow, having really big files like have like a Q2, or again this 100 megapixel files which end up being like 200 megabytes each if you're shooting RAW. So and if you're shooting RAW plus JPEG, you don't get as many shots in like 256 gigabyte SD card, or if you're using the other formats that this camera has. So that's something to look out for if you are someone who's not prepared for that. Like luckily my computer is fast enough that I don't mind a little bit of a delay. But if you're not someone who's kind of like in the video world, or who primarily shoots photos, maybe that's going to be kind of like a shock to you, how much processing power these files really need. But I really do think it's worth it, but it's something to look out for. The last thing I'm going to touch on is not really a con or a pro, it's more like an observation on the autofocus. Again, this is my first experience using medium format and using autofocus on it, so I have no previous knowledge on what it's like versus like other iterations of this camera. So if I compare it to like my Leica Q2, I think it's comparable. I think the autofocus is fast enough for that kind of shooting. But if you compare it to like a Sony, it really is not there for autofocus. Like it really hunts quite a bit and not in the right situation. So like if you get plenty of light and you're in the right conditions, you'll hit focus. But if you're not prepared to like kind of help out the camera find focus, it's gonna struggle a little bit. But other than that, I think for someone who comes from like the Leica Q2, the autofocus here is, I think it's pretty good. Like like I said, I'm used to the Leica Q2, not struggling, but knowing when and when not I'm gonna be struggling to shoot. So looking at this camera like that, it really helped out for me to be able to get focus 95% of the time. So like I didn't really struggle with the autofocus because I didn't have a prior knowledge on the autofocus before that. So I was able to use this camera for one photography gig. I was second shooting, so I can really show the files. So for instance, we were shooting pretty late in the day. It was basically pitch black, and the only thing that was lit was the stage. So in that situation, it did pretty well. Like it didn't hunt very much, so I was pretty far off, and it did really well. So if autofocus is something that you're kind of struggling to kind of grasp on, I would definitely rent this and see if that fits your workflow. But if you're like a wedding or event photographer, I think this is definitely like a niche camera, kind of like the Q2. Whenever I shoot weddings, the Leica Q2 is kind of like the camera that I use for like specialty shots. And what I mean by specialty shots, it just means whenever I feel like taking a picture, if I think the moment or the scene kind of calls for a medium format, that's kind of like what I would use this camera for. So if you're looking to add this to your kit, I would use it as like a secondary, a third body. You're obviously gonna get really beautiful images, especially because you do get a different look to it. And I think for weddings, I think if your budget kind of allows yourself to add this to the kit, I think it's really worth it for that, just to kind of differentiate yourself from other photographers. And yeah, I would really recommend it if you're doing some kind of event photography, especially in the like slower sides of weddings. I think this is kind of a no-brainer. So I really enjoyed using this camera for the last month, and if my budget allowed, I would love to add this to the kit. Right now, it's not really in the cards, but if you're a working photographer or enthusiast and your budget allows for medium format, this is really, I think, the best rounded package in medium format, just because it has the latest and greatest in everything. They improved the autofocus. You get the added on specs for video. So if you want a hybrid camera, I don't know if this is your first choice, but if you're primarily a photographer, does some video, and is interested in like keeping things fresh, you have the budget for it, I definitely would recommend this camera, because I just had so much fun with it. And I think it's not just such a beautiful sensor and beautifully made, I think it really made me get a different perspective of other realms of photography, and I was able to like be inspired by it. Would I recommend this camera to people? Obviously, but I don't know if it's in everybody's budget. It's $8,500 just for the body. So I really think it's up to the photographer what the package is worth to them. I honestly do love the medium format look, and so if I could have the budget for this, I would definitely be interested in it. But I'll be more curious to see how many people add this to their kit, because I've been talking with other wedding photographers, and a lot of them, they shoot with medium format already, and on both film and on digital. Especially with digital, I was really surprised how many photographers already use GFX cameras on their workflow. So if you have a GFX camera and you're looking to upgrade and you're using for events, I think this is a great addition to anybody's kit. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions on the GFX 102 or any other cameras, or you have any other comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you next time.